Welcome to Light from Light. My name is Daniel, and this is Brother Thomas Therese. Today, we're exploring the quiet yet powerful life of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, a saint who really inspires both of us. We'll talk about her conversion, her encounters with Jesus and Mary, her missionary heart, and also why she's one of the patron saints of missionaries. So just invite you to subscribe to the podcast and let us know in the comments. Have you come across St. Therese's life before? Is there anything that stands out in particular about her life or anything that's inspiring about her life? Brother Thomas, in a nutshell, who was St. Therese of Lisieux?
She was a Carmelite nun who lived in the 19th century, born, I think, on the 2nd of January 1873. She died age 24, so very, very young. And if my maths doesn't fail me, that's about 1897. She died in September, I think September the 30th, but her feast day is actually in October. It used to be the 3rd of October, I think, in the old calendar, and it still is in the Melkite rite. But now we would, in the Latin West, celebrate her feast day on the 1st of October. She was canonized and beatified by the same Pope, Pope Pius the 11th, who stood strong in the face of Nazi Germany. And there's this big basilica dedicated to her in northern France. St. John Paul II called her the Doctor of Love. And she writes many things. She writes many letters. But what she's probably most well known for is this story of a soul, which is written over 3 manuscripts, which are all put together to make a sort of spiritual classic. It's a sort of spiritual autobiography, and she talks about her early childhood years. But as time goes on, she talks about her vocation to becoming a Carmelite, and you see really the magnanimity, the greatness of soul of this young, great French saint. She lived her entire life in northern France. She was born in Alençon, in northern France, and she died in Lisieux, hence why she's called Thérèse of Lisieux. She goes on this great pilgrimage to go and meet the Pope, I think, for the Holy Year, and she asks at a very young age, while she was still a teenager, if she could enter Carmel. She'd already been told by the bishop no, but she said to Pope Leo, no, she was told not to talk to the Pope. And Pope Leo the 13th, it was, who our current Pope took his name after, and she breaks protocol and she speaks out and she asks him to enter Carmel, and he says, if it's God's will that then you will. And she returns and she enters Carmel a year early. She, of course, already has family members in the same Carmel, which is unusual because St. Teresa of Avila says that you shouldn't have more than one member of the same family in the same Carmel. And I think you do see a little bit why when you read Teresa's story of her soul. She has this beautiful story of lingering outside her sister's office, hoping to catch a conversation and glimpses of her, which I love because, I think we've all been in that sort of situation, lingering in the tea room, hoping somebody's going to come through so we can have a chat and avoid doing a little bit of work that we might have to do. So yeah, she's captivated the hearts and the minds of many, and she became one of the greatest saints of, if not the greatest saint of the 19th century. But she really became known in the 20th century during World War One, when her Story of a Soul was mass produced and became probably the best-selling book in French, I think. And so, yeah, many people on the front lines of the trenches during World War One have all these sorts of apparitions of her and attribute various miraculous things being saved from being shot at and things by her intercession. Her writings and her great writing, particularly on love, I think is what many people now think about. But at the time, it was also the fact that she was so Christocentric. She would speak a lot about Christ. She mentions the Blessed Mother in her writings about 24 times in this autobiography, but it's very much Jesus at the forefront of her her conversations and discussions. And again, this emphasis on love in the wake of what's called Jansenism, which is a very harsh and strict form of Christianity, which was condemned by the Catholic Church because of its strictness, well, for various reasons, and its view on grace. Thérèse of Lisieux talks about grace in a way which is a great antidote to that error which arises then. So that's her in a nutshell. She loves her family. She prays for priests. She wants to be all these different things. She wants to be a priest. She wants to be a missionary. She wants, of course, to be a Carmelite nun. She realizes that the thread that ties all these things together is love. And so she says, my vocation is to be love at the heart of the church, providing a great insight not only into her vocation, but into the vocation of every baptized Christian. So from my perspective, she does have a doctrine, and a very beautifully articulated one. But I think we'll get maybe more into those things later. Her writing her life is something which I think is greatly to be admired. And she was only 23. I should probably add that she dies of tuberculosis, age 24, on the 30th of September, I think it was. And by this stage, she's essentially, her body is rotting from the inside out. And at that time, they did not give people, well, in some circumstances, they would not give people morphine or drugs because, or the milk of the poppy, because they sort of thought that this compromised the rationality and the freedom of the individual. And so it was something which was seen to be a bit dishonorable in death to have, excessive pain relief and things. So I think she was even refused those things. When she was ill, actually, her superior didn't think that she had something serious at the time, and it was only when they got a second reference from a second doctor that they realised what was really going on. But it was a bit too late by then, I'm afraid. Yeah, the survival rates for tuberculosis during the 19th century were not particularly high. Yes, but she dies age 24 from tuberculosis, and from my memory, her last words were, "My Jesus, love," or "My Jesus, I love you," something like that, I think, from what I remember. Then she died.
I mean, that's an interesting segue, because there is something very beautiful from her early life. So she always had a particular great love of Jesus, and at her First Holy Communion, she described it as a moment of fusion. She said I was no longer myself. I had become one with Jesus. And I think that speaks to that point, the great love and you could say personal relationship that she has with Jesus is very strong. And there's another particular story from her childhood which really stands out for me. Is it shows really up to this point in her life she had this particular emotional sensitivity, but also coupled that a really great and early desire for holiness. And she describes this story. She's 13 years old, but she's still quite emotionally young, and she's easily hurt. And then on Christmas Eve, after midnight mass, Thérèse overhears her father, and he says, "Thank goodness that's the last time we will have to go through this," referring to Thérèse's childhood tradition of leaving shoes out for gifts to arrive. And normally this would have made Thérèse cry, but in that moment, she describes receiving a miraculous grace. So instead of reacting with tears, she feels a sudden strength and peace. And she chooses joy, she smiles, and then she acts with love to her family. And she later describes this moment as Jesus changed her heart, and it gave her the strength really to forget herself and to think of others there. And you could say it probably it marks the beginning of this spiritual maturity, her path of the little way, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But she also describes it as Jesus accomplished in an instant what I had been trying to do for 10 years. So it strikes me that there are many things in my life that I've been striving to change, but if I go to Jesus in simplicity, he can accomplish that in in an instant. What for you, Brother Thomas, was the one story that best shows who Saint Therese is?
Well, I think that one is the one that you mentioned is interesting because for many people they'd sort of say like, oh well, why is that miraculous? The fact that you didn't get upset that they would choose that. This shows a great deal of self-knowledge on the part of Therese, I think. There's another story from her canonization where the sisters talk about her selflessness and they say, oh, she always chose the broken pencils. And the cardinals were like, well, so what? You know, like, what's that? Why is that miraculous? Why is that a sign of extraordinary sanctity that she chose a broken pencil? Lots of us choose broken pencils. Lots of us have no other choice but to have broken pencils. Um, and her sister said, well, if you knew Therese, you knew why that would be for her an extraordinary grace, because she liked having new things and she liked things being, just so. And that was part of who she was and part of her personality and her preferences. So similarly with this, the fact that she wanted things, to be just so in sort of her way, and she didn't want these things to change. And she wanted to be treated as her father called her, my little queen. He had nicknames for a lot of the children. One of the children was called the Pearl. Another one was like the bold and courageous, strong one. And Therese was my little queen, partly because of how she acted. Her father says, if you kiss the ground, I will give you this money. And she refuses. And she says she refuses not because, of... not because she didn't want the money, or not because she thought, why should I? It was a sense of, it was pride, is what she says. She says, I didn't do it because, it was beneath me to do such a thing. And she says, well, actually, I should be humble. So she was recognizing in herself, that there were things that she had to progress in the spiritual life. And this was one of those moments where she was granted the grace not to, start crying and become very volatile emotionally. Of course, she did lose her mum actually at a very young age, which may
Yeah, she was only
explain some of
4.
her. Yeah. Age, what did you say, sorry?
Age 4.
Age 4. So, I mean, that might explain some of the reactions that she had. So, nevertheless, but receiving this healing and this grace from the Lord, to be able to have more of an even-handed, and more calm and settled temperament is a good gift. But there's another story which comes to my mind, which I think really shows, at least for me, her sort of her playfulness, and her playfulness, I think is the right word, sort of excitement and encouragement. And that would be when I think she's hiding and waiting for her sister Celine. I think it's Celine. And she's waiting and she's hiding. And she wants to know if Celine has brought blessed bread. So there's this tradition in France that, children under a certain age, they wouldn't have gone to mass. They'd have stayed home with their mum, with one of the parents. And there would be blessed bread brought home for the children, which obviously is not the Eucharist. It's not been transformed into the body and blood of Christ, but nevertheless is blessed at a certain time during the Mass. And for a lot of the children, they'd see this as like, well, this is my little communion, this is my little Mass. And that's how she called it. So she's sort of waiting, sort of trying to be really patient. And then she bursts out from behind this door and she accosts her sister and she says, where is the blessed bread? Have you brought the blessed bread? And I find that really, really sweet and funny, and you do see that in children, don't you? That sort of that excitement and that wonder, and they're trying so hard to wait, and then all of a sudden they just burst, into the room, seeking something that they like. And so I can see that happening because I've seen that same sort of thing in the life of many of the children who come to Mass or in my own family. And they don't, she says that she doesn't have any blessed bread. So Therese says, well, okay, fine, we'll make some. So they go and they get some bread, they cut, a slice off, And they very solemnly, she says, we very solemnly said a Hail Mary over the bread, and we made the sign of the cross, and then we had to taste it to make sure that it really was blessed bread, you know. And you can hear her now as an adult woman, you know, smiling and at the funniness of what she was like as a child, and really appreciating the goodness that was there. I think we all have moments like that, don't we, where we remember funny things that we did as kids, and it makes us smile. So that I really like, because it shows something of her humor in her older age. It shows something of her humor, and something of that sort of irascible sort of excitability. Her sweetness is not a sort of gooey-eyed sweetness. It's actually very pragmatic and practical. Well, we don't have any blessed bread. Well, fine. You know, let's roll up our sleeves and let's make some. You know, we're going to all go on a great big adventure and all have a great picnic in the fields. You know, it's something that's not afraid to get your boots dirty. Although I'm sure actually Saint Thérèse would have not liked to get her boots dirty. At the same time, she's quite pragmatic, funny, and playful, excitable. And I really appreciate that about her. And I think you see that in one of those early stories, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, her family upbringing was very loving. So although her mum died at the age of 4, because she was the youngest of 9, and Pauline, her older sister, then became that sort of mother figure for her. And there are she tells her beautiful stories of her looking to Pauline as her second mother. There's quite a pivotal story as well, moment in her life when Pauline goes to the convent, and Thérèse is left bedridden for quite a long time, and it's quite an intense illness. So she has this intense weakness. She has hallucinations, and the doctors were quite unsure what was happening, and you know, the family were very worried about her. But it's beautiful. Shows the family and their love for Thérèse. They gather around her. They pray intensely for her. And Thérèse, in her bedroom, if you go to Lisieux, you can visit the house, and the statue of Our Lady is in her bedroom. You can imagine it there.
I
There's this
think
statue.
that's a replica. I think
Yeah,
they moved the real one to the Carmel. Is that right? I think
yeah,
if you
yeah.
go and visit where her body is in the Carmel, I think you can see the original one above there. But they have a replica. You can really get up close to it in the house, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can imagine Theresa's in bed, intensely ill, and the family are praying for her. And Thérèse turns and she sees this statue in her room, and she said, "Suddenly the Blessed Virgin appeared to me, beautiful, so beautiful, that never had I seen anything so attractive. Her face was suffused with an ineffable kindness and tenderness. But what touched me to the very depths of my soul was the ravishing smile of the Blessed Virgin." So the statue is referred to as Our Lady of the Smile. And in that instant, Therese was healed, her strength returned, and that emotional fog that she had dissipates. And Therese, she really considers this to be a direct miracle of Mary. So she later describes it: "The Blessed Virgin smiled at me. She said, 'How happy am I to recall that sweet smile. It was the smile of the Blessed Virgin that cured me.'" And I think then she goes on to write about Mary as the queen of heaven, but she's more a mother than a queen to us, and that sort of maternal love then starts to shape her spirituality and her writings. Brother Thomas, have you any examples you can recall of that, where her relationship with Mary shapes her later
Yeah.
writings?
One of the things that comes to my mind, and I wonder whether actually part of her relationship with Mary is shaped by the fact that she loses her mother at a young age, and then when Pauline enters the convent, it's like losing a second mother. She describes it as you as you so eloquently said before. I wonder if that sort of shapes her closeness to the Blessed Mother there. Also, the what I mean, one of the things that first comes to my mind is when she says how good it is to sing the praises of the Blessed Virgin, but how much more she would rather that we imitate her virtues, that we're supposed to imitate the Blessed Virgin Mary in her life as disciples and show all of those kindnesses and virtues which she exemplifies in her person. So I think that's part of her Marian spirituality. Again, coming back to that practical, pragmatic sense of if we imitate the Blessed Mother, then actually we can't go. We're not going far wrong because the Blessed Mother is so close to Christ.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier about the little way that she's Saint Thérèse is very well known for. So she joins the Carmelite sisters at 15, and the Carmelite tradition has many great saints: Saint John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, other great mystics and saints. And I think it's fair to say Thérèse struggled with that, struggled with comparisons, with the comparing her life with those great saints, and she realized and concluded that she couldn't really be like them. She describes it as, I compared myself with the great saints. The difference between them and me was as great as that between a mountain and a grain of sand. So she realized that she had to embrace her smallness and recognize that actually God was the one who would lift her as an elevator lifts someone. And I mean, we said earlier about the love she has for Jesus, that personal love. She describes it as the elevator which God is the elevator which must raise me to heaven, and that elevator is your arms, O Jesus, for I'm too small to climb the rough stairway of perfection. Brother Thomason, how would you describe this little way that she develops with her spiritual writings?
Well, I think Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who describes it very well. Mother Teresa, of course, takes the name Teresa after Thérèse of Lisieux. And she says, I can do no great things, only small things with great love. And I think that really is, in a nutshell, in a very pithy phrase, what the little way is. It's doing your ordinary everyday things, but doing them with love, essentially pursuing the path of love. So when you fulfill your vocation as a parent, looking after your children, doing those things with love, no small task, of course, but doing those things with love, that is following the little way. You're not necessarily going to get any acclaim for it. You're not necessarily going to get any public recognition for it. You know, the government isn't going to give you an award saying, you know, Mum of the Year. But nevertheless, doing those things with great love is the little way to heaven. So small acts of kindnesses that we show on a day-to-day basis, whatever they may be. You know, you see somebody who's hungry on the street and you give them something to eat. Those ordinary, everyday acts that we do, if we do them with great love, profit us for eternal life. Everybody, well, I say everybody, many people in today's society, of course, they want to be somebody big and they want to be famous, or they want to be an influencer and they want a lot of money and prestige and fame. And the little way is, you know, stands in the face of all of that and says, well, actually, you don't need that. You know, what you want to be is a great saint in heaven. You know, you want to be in heaven. Well, follow the little way of love, the path of love and the path of service. You know, those who are acclaimed in this world, they've had their reward, as we heard in the gospel the other day at Mass. So following that little path of love, and being content with the fact that you may be a daisy or a buttercup, and not, you know, a rose or a lily, as Saint Thérèse says. She sees herself as a little flower. Now, of course, who could look at her life and not say she was one of the greatest saints that we have known? But nevertheless, she sees herself as in that smallness, and she says, you know, with would the spring be as lovely? Would the field be as lovely if you didn't have the smaller flowers like the daisy? If every flower was a lily, or every flower was a rose, would spring be as beautiful? Would the fields be as beautiful? You need that sort of variety of the many different heights of flowers, and all of them have their purpose and their goodness. Um, all of them have the sun shine on them and the rain fall on them, to use another biblical reference. And that sun and that rain, of course, comes from God. It represents God's grace. So God's grace is shown to all, and we all grow in the measure of the sort of that sort of creature that we are, and the way that we open ourselves to that holiness. But in a nutshell, um, living our life and our doing things with great love.
Another a great thing I think about Saint Therese is that she has throughout her life this great missionary impulse, this desire that others will come to know Jesus and know our Lord. And she prays intently for priests and missionaries. So she later becomes a patron saint of missionaries, yet she doesn't leave the convent after she enters. And I think that this dynamic is rather interesting, and how that how that comes about. How can she be a great missionary without leaving the convent? And there's one particular story I know that we both particularly like, is of Henri Pranzini. Maybe Brother Thomas, you just share a little bit about that story.
Pranzini was born in Alexandria. Um, he served for a little while in the British Army. He was clearly a very clever man because he could speak, I think, 8 languages. He was a polyglot. He spoke about 8 languages. Um, he eventually comes to Paris, and they think he was a bit of a gigolo or a pimp, because he had unexplained wealth, which he obtained from women. Um, and in the end, he's arrested for a crime. There are 3 murders on Rue Montagne, or the mountain road, I guess you'd call it, in Paris. And 3 people are killed. The youngest victim is 9 years old. She has her fingers chopped off on her right hand. Her neck is cut. I think I think that she's actually beheaded, pretty much. But all three of the victims are killed. The youngest of 9, the eldest being 40, and it's a really traumatic time in France. And eventually they accuse Pranzini. Pranzini says that he is innocent. Now, Therese worries for his soul. Therese worries that if he doesn't confess the crime, what will become of him? He refuses, I think, to confess and to receive the priest's chaplain, and he always maintains his innocence even to his death. And so Saint Therese prays, and she asks for a sign of Pranzini's repentance. And just before he's guillotined at 5 o'clock in the morning in Paris, outside this prison, he asks to kiss the crucifix. And Therese sees this as her sign from heaven that whatever sins he has committed, he has repented from. And so she sees Pranzini as like a spiritual, one of her spiritual children. She might even call him her first spiritual child, because, of course, if I'm not mistaken, this is before she enters Carmel. So, yeah, again, that's one of the ways in which she shows this great missionary spirit. She also wanted, of course, to go to, was it the Philippines? And she says, I want to plant the cross of Christ on
Vietnam, yeah,
every, Vietnam.
yeah.
I want to plant the cross of Christ on every shore. And she wanted to join the Carmel there, but she just wasn't well enough. But I mean, it is remarkable that she is the patron saint of missionaries, considering she stayed as a cloistered nun. But through her prayer, she was present throughout the world, and still is present throughout the world, through her prayer and the many graces which are bestowed on us through her intercession now in
Yeah.
heaven.
But it
Um,
shows the power of intercessory prayer
yeah,
as well. And there are priests who she adopted in her life and prayed for them while she was in Carmel as well.
Hmm.
Talking about her impact, so under obedience, Saint Therese wrote her autobiography, and this is called the Story of a Soul. And really during her life, she was rather unknown really to the world. But after her death, when the autobiography was published, it became incredibly popular, as you mentioned earlier, and really one of the well-known spiritual classics. And I was reading earlier in the week that it's estimated that more than 500 million copies have been sold
Wow.
across the world. I think it's incredible, and
Remarkable.
translated into numerous languages, maybe more than 50 languages. So she's a popular. She became a popular saint. She still is a popular saint to call upon for her intercession, and her impact was so pivotal that she became a doctor of the church. She was named a doctor of the church. So it's remarkable, this young Carmelite nun who died at the age of 24, writing, relatively little, really, would become such an important doctor of the church. And Brother Thomas, I wonder what your thoughts are on why Therese's writing has been so pivotal and had such a big impact on many people, from popes, saints, theologians, to soldiers on the battlefield, to people in far-flung places who are, praying and are reading her works. I wonder why she's had such a large impact. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think partly it's because people want to know that they're loved, and John Paul II, when he made her Doctor of the Church in 1997, says that, okay, she doesn't have any doctrinal corpus, and yet she has this beautiful, erudite way of explaining the gospel in her little way, and so she becomes the doctor of divine love. Like, she knows the science of divine love. And really, I think that's one of the things that makes her most popular, is that people want to know that they're loved by God. They want to know how to live a good life and to love their neighbor well. And they can see in the life of this saint, I think, something of themselves, and also how society and how the world could be better. I think it's it's not by chance that her devotion grows so quickly amongst soldiers in the trenches, because the stories that she tells of her earlier life will remind the men of not only their own childhood, but people back home, and the innocence of the world, which has been lost when they're surrounded by man's inhumanity to man in the industrialization of warfare. And they see in the trenches this glimmer of innocence that they want to protect. And they're reminded of home, but more than this, they're also reminded of the future. They're reminded that even if they die, they have a home that is prepared for them in heaven, a home of love, a place without suffering, and it encourages them, I think, and spurs them on. Whilst it's true that her receiving the doctorate wasn't without contention, I mean, the overwhelming number of people who were asked to give their opinion to the Holy See were in favour of her receiving a doctorate. The Holy See had received lots of letters from bishops and the lay faithful throughout the world asking that she be granted a doctorate, partly because of her originality of thought and her way of expressing the gospel, which shows such a deep understanding that people could that other ordinary people could understand and explain and remember, and it encouraged them to live a good life. And you saw the effect that she had on people, ordinary everyday people, from children to soldiers, from parents left at home, people who struggle with various kinds of illnesses and disease, who can relate to her in her final agony. All of these people could see something of themselves in Therese and hope that they too would be able to become a saint and know how to do it. And of course, the teaching of the little way is remarkable. I mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast about an episode in her life where she lingers outside her sister's door, her sister who's the superior at the time, And this is when she realizes that she doesn't love people as Jesus loves them, because she's only seeking out the company of those who she wants to see, people who make her feel good, you know. And so then she says, well, actually, maybe I should seek out the company of those who I find it difficult to love and thereby grow in Christian charity. And this idea, I think, that we're called to a greater love, and that we might just be that person who is in need of that greater love at times, is something I think which can teach us all. She's got this great phrase where she says, Jesus said, I call you no longer servants, I call you friends. I set out how to figure out how Jesus loved us, so that way I knew how to love other people, love one another as I have loved you. I call you no longer servants, I call you friends, so therefore I should love you with this love of friendship. So I think, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why her devotion spread so quickly. People find in her a friend. And very often people say when they pray to her, things happen in a way that they can see and they recognize. So one of the things that sometimes happens is they'll pray and they'll see roses, or they'll smell roses. And of course, she said, I will scatter the earth with roses from heaven, and I'll spend my heaven doing good on earth. So it gives them confidence to pray. And the Holy See sees the effects of her doctrine, recognizing that her doctrine is not articulated and formulated in the way of St. Alphonsus Liguori or Thomas Aquinas, but nevertheless, there is something there which helps people to live a good Christian life, and the effects of that are manifested in the lives of those who have a devotion to her and have read her writings. Yeah,
Yeah.
an originality of thought, and yeah. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, I mean, she's had a big impact on many people, but including yourself as well, because
Yeah.
she had a big impact on your life before you became a Dominican friar.
Mm.
And in becoming a Dominican friar, you took the name Therese as your religious name, Brother Thomas Therese. And I wonder if that must be the reason why you took the name, but what sort of impact has this decision had on your time as a Dominican friar? Has it marked your
To take
the
the name
last
Therese,
10 years or so? Yeah, taking the name Therese. Yeah.
that's a very interesting question. Everybody whose advice I asked for before I did it thought it was a bad idea and that there was no precedent for it. I remember talking to the late, great Bishop Robert Christian. It was before he became an auxiliary bishop in San Francisco. And he spoke about a friar in the US who took the name Therese, and it was a complete disaster. And in the end, he left, and it was all very bad. I spoke to Father Paul Murray, really great Dominican friar, just to see if there was any precedent for it. And he said, no, the only one that I know of is that people take the name Mary. But I thought, if religious sisters can take the name, Mary John or Mary Patrick, Mary Roberts, to use just two names from the Sister Act, why can't I be Brother Thomas Therese? It doesn't mean that I have to use this second part of the name. It would be very fitting for a Carmelite to remain hidden because they live this hidden life. But nevertheless, I really owe her a lot. And my devotion to her started when I was about 7. And I forgot about it I must have been, 11, from about 11 to almost, 23, 24. And I'd forgotten about it. And I had a particular experience on her feast day. And then I reignited this devotion. But I can talk about that maybe another time. But I don't think it's any coincidence that she's the patroness of vocations, and she comes back in my life in a very loud way during the time when I'm discerning to become a Dominican friar. And I find out that I'm accepted into the order age 24, which of course was the age that she died. So she's always, I came to realize she'd always been there in my life. And then I read her biography, and it really changed my perspective on life, and the Christian life in particular, and love. I owe her an eternal debt. And she looks out for me. There are times when I pray to her, and You know, I get roses unexpectedly sent to me by somebody, or yeah, things happening, or a picture of Saint Therese somebody might give to me, something like that, and nobody else will know that I'm praying for something in particular. So she has adopted me, I think, really as her spiritual child, as
Another spiritual
her
child.
brother. Yeah, yeah,
And she has many, many spiritual children.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode, and we've explored really the life and impact of Saint Therese. And if you get the opportunity, I think both of us would really recommend going to visit Lisieux. It's a beautiful little village or town, I suppose. But we also highly recommend reading the autobiography, The Story of a Soul, that Saint Therese wrote. And there are other really good books as well. We'll put a couple in the description for this episode. As Brother Thomas said earlier, Saint Therese said on her deathbed, "I will spend my heaven doing good on earth, and I will let fall a shower of roses." And she still continues to befriend many people. So just really recommend getting to know her, her life, and let her be one of your heavenly friends. So please subscribe to the podcast, share this episode with anyone you think might be inspired by Saint Teresa's life. And yeah, leave a comment
Tell us,
maybe about
yeah.
her life and what you remember most about about her life if you already know her.
And if you have any of your own stories about how Therese has impacted you, it'd be really interesting to hear those. There's this great book that I think we both read about the impact that Therese had on the soldiers in World War One, and hearing their stories is just really fascinating. So, yeah, tell us how Therese has helped you in your life.
Yeah, and in Carmel itself, we've both seen Carmel in Lisieux. There's a wall full of placards of people who have experienced consolations or graces or miracles as a result of Saint Teresa's intercession for them. So well worth a visit, and she's really, it's really worth getting to know Saint Therese as a heavenly friend. Thank you very much, everyone.